Welcome to Stoked with Megan McPhail, the podcast that helps you get super effing jazzed about your work, life, and bank account. I'm your host, Megan McPhail, a former burnt-out emergency veterinarian that quit my hard-earned career to become a seven-figure business coach, entrepreneur, and elopement photographer. Now I'm living a life I absolutely love, full of travel, adventure, and financial abundance, and I am hell-bent on inspiring others to do the same. Are you ready to say goodbye to the 9-to-5 grind and start going after some big, bold dreams? Then let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, it's your host, Megan McPhail.
And your co-host, Todd Reedy.
Today we're covering an important topic that most photographers and elopement photographers are at least somewhat familiar with, and that's the 7 leave no trace principles. And I'm going to go over those principles, but more importantly, I'm going to talk about the controversies around leave no trace because of an incident that happened recently to one of my mastermind students. It prompted me to do this podcast. So I'm going to go, you can Google these, they're everywhere. You can find a list, but I'll go ahead and explain the 7 concepts. You're familiar with these, right, Ted?
I am.
So the first principle of leave no trace is to plan ahead and prepare, which I think for elopement photographers is super, super important because we don't want to be outside when it's freezing or unaware of the weather or get lost or whatever. And so planning ahead and preparing is like exactly what we do as elopement planners and photographers. You want to be familiar with the weather, with the trails, with the conditions. You want to have layers, you want to have water, you want to have snacks, you want to have hand warmers if it's cold, all that kind of stuff. So that's a really important one that really just kind of, you can cross-reference just your whole client experience and elopement planning process with that one. The next one is to travel and hike and camp on durable surfaces. Durable surfaces are things like sand or stone or existing trails. So that's really important as well. You don't want to go super off trail and start trampling stuff. The third principle is to dispose of waste properly. I don't think we need to go more into that. The fourth is to leave what you find. So that means not picking flowers, not taking rocks, stuff like that. The fifth one is to minimize campfire impact. Obviously, you don't want to start a huge fire. So making sure that you do campfires appropriately and put them out with water and all that stuff. The sixth one is to respect wildlife. That means not approaching buffalo and bears and also not feeding wildlife or messing with, the places where they have nests or eggs or whatever. I feel like that's hopefully pretty self-explanatory too. And then the seventh one is to be considerate of other visitors because almost always you're practicing these principles like in a park, whether it be state or national. And so, you don't want to prevent other visitors from enjoying themselves in these outdoor locations. And that's also very important for us when we're taking photos in amazing places or having ceremonies and stuff. We don't want to take away from the other visitors' time. Do you have any thoughts on those just off the top of your head, Todd?
Initially, my thoughts are just these are just common sense things that people should be implementing regardless if they're elopement photographers, videographers, or just people in general in life.
Yeah.
So again, just kind of doing the right thing is what it boils down to.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, it's just common sense, not destroying things, not leaving garbage everywhere, not blasting music or just things that make it unenjoyable in the outdoors. And being respectful. I think that is a great way to put it.
Yeah. And on the 7th one about being considerate to others, I think that most people that are listening to this know that they should be looking into permits and things. And there are certain areas of certain parks, national or state or recreation areas that have, designated ceremony spots. And I think the vast majority of us do a good job doing the best we can with permits, knowing that we are using those spaces and other people may want to be using those spaces too. So it's not like we have the authority to kick people out, but then we do have the permission to use those spaces within reason. So again, it's kind of a self-explanatory, treat others like you'd be treated.
Yeah, and I think that I honestly, when I'm in like national parks that are a little busy, I'll often like tell people when they're like, "Oh, you want to take photos here or whatever," and I'm like, "You guys, you finish what you're doing. Like, I want you to enjoy this experience too. Like, we can wait our turn like everyone else. Like I'd really try to make it known that we're not here to push people aside or anything like that. So, what would you say if I told you there's a lot of controversy surrounding these leave no trace principles?
Well, I'm familiar with some.
What controversies are you familiar with?
The very first one I'm thinking about was like, I want to say maybe it was like last year. Somebody had some crazy, like, it was probably bigger than an intimate wedding. And like, they just left tables and trash and like decorations and like just shit everywhere. I think it kind of went viral. Like, there were photos that went, all over the internet. And like,
oh, yeah. I didn't even think to bring that up. But yeah, it's a great.
Yeah, it was kind of even highlighted in some like national mainstream media. And so that kind of put a damper like across the board. And maybe that's part of the reason why I guess permits are getting more strict. But yeah, people that I think probably more often is people that don't do elopements or do intimate weddings in nature often, just like may not know all the intricacies or like think about it because it's so like out of the norm. Yeah. Like, so someone who's normally shooting a wedding in a venue, like they're never probably going to think about the garbage.
Yeah.
But when you're in kind of our world, you need to be cognizant of that.
Pack it in, pack it out.
Yeah. So that would be the first acknowledgement of a controversy.
Yeah. But I mean,
not spicy.
Controversy around the actual principles. Like, people think the principles aren't good.
Oh, no, I'm not familiar with the principles.
Well, so I will talk about that because I don't think it's brought up very much. And I want to highlight something that happened to one of the members of the Elopement Photographer Mastermind. He had some photos up. I don't know if it was his website or if somebody came across them on social media of some photos he had taken up on Trail Ridge Road in Rocky Mountain National Park. And if you're not familiar with that, it's like 11,000 feet, 12,000 feet or something. It's above tree line. So when you're walking around, if you go off trail and off the roads, then there's tundra there. And high alpine tundra is it kind of looks like moss or grass and might have little wildflowers in it. But if you're not familiar with it, it's hard to recognize as a surface that you shouldn't be walking on. So he took some photos. The couple you could see were walking on tundra. And that's a no-no, especially, I had to learn that the hard way, but I will talk about that in a second. But some random person decided to leave a 1-star review on his Google business page and citing the fact that he had photographed a couple on tundra. And this is where I get really pissed because affecting someone's livelihood and leaving a 1-star review when you've never worked with that person. And I know this person is amazing and he supports his wife and their dogs with this income. And he would never go against the leave no trace principles knowingly. So to publicly shame somebody and potentially hurt their income is a huge controversy surrounding leave no trace because a lot of people, the quote unquote leave no trace police, will publicly shame and try to hurt people, and in the case that you're talking about that happened on Moab BLM land and the couple got a permit but did not state what they were actually doing and they just trashed this beautiful land. That's disgusting. But publicly shaming people is just not the answer to following the leave no trace principles. If you see somebody violating these principles, which are basically recommendations, the best thing to do is either just go on your way and ignore it because it's not our job to police everybody, or privately message them and kindly educate them. The 7th principle says be considerate, guys. Not to shame people. And I was publicly shamed. I think in 2017, I also went up to Rocky Mountain National Park and walked on tundra and took a couple photos there. We were a little off trail. I didn't know that we were supposed to skip around on rocks because there was no signage and no explanation. And after shooting elopements for years and after being publicly called out for it. I learned that tundra was very delicate and we can't walk on it and all that kind of stuff. But that created anxiety for me forever because I'm like, oh my God, am I recreating in the outdoors perfectly? Because if I'm not, somebody is going to call me out. And it kind of ruins the whole experience, right? And people also are selective about who they choose to call out when it comes to leave no trace. I came across some articles where people of color and heavier set outdoor recreationists who are like influencers or whatever on Instagram are constantly being called out for leave no trace principles by the leave no trace police. Even if they're like really following them, they'll still nitpick them to death. And this is not the way to appreciate the outdoors.
Or be a good steward for the principles, right?
Yeah, exactly. Again, the seventh principle is be considerate of other visitors. We are all visitors of these places. And these are places that have been visited by human beings for decades and decades and decades. And there is a history of us recreating in these places. And there's no way to truly leave no trace that we were there because some of these places have millions of visitors a year. And it's not your job to police it. One of the things that I brought up to this student or this member that had this 1-star review that drives me crazy is that all these people police the tundra. And I really think it's about gatekeeping and scarcity and all that stuff. Like they're using the leave no trace principles to try to scare people to stop photographing in these places so they can have them to themselves. That's really what it comes down to. Because Rocky Mountain National Park, they scroll through people's Instagrams, they see who posts in Rocky Mountain National Park, and they will call you out and fine you if you didn't pull a permit to work there. They will not call you out and fine you if you're walking on the tundra. So why is it Joe Schmo on Instagram's job to publicly shame somebody for walking on the tundra when Rocky Mountain National Park is like totally aware this happens and has not done anything to change it, at least since I've been visiting it for like the past 8 years? They could put up more signs. They could rope off these areas, but they don't. And like, yes, photographers go there and we need to be good stewards for these places, but we're not the only people walking on the tundra. And that doesn't give us the excuse to just go willy-nilly and do whatever we want. But people are learning how to build their businesses and enjoy the outdoors with their couples. It is a learning process. I used to walk on the tundra. I used to feed wildlife because I was like, oh my God, this chipmunk wants my popcorn. I thought it was the coolest thing. I used to walk off trail. You know, like I still walk off trail if I have to take a piss on a hike. You know, I'll freaking accidentally step on some wildflowers. I've picked wildflowers before. Again, I'm not saying like, okay, if you know the principles, just ignore them. Who cares? But like a lot of people, they just haven't learned yet. And that's no fault of their own. Like, let's not shame them and make them think that the outdoors have to be done perfectly. When that's just insane. Like, yes, use common sense. But yeah, if I have to pee, I'm going to go walk off trail and I'm going to pee in the woods. That's not leave no trace, right?
Yeah. And the whole idea isn't like a binary, like black and white thing. Like you're perfect and obey every rule at all times, or you're like anti and leave no trace and against nature.
Yeah, use your best judgment.
Right. Across the board, there's shades of gray. I mean, these places are meant to recreate.
Yeah.
And I mean, we should be aware of the rules. We should follow the rules to the best of our knowledge, but it shouldn't be like such a hard and fast thing that there's no wiggle room there. I guess like walking on grass, it's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And like walking on certain, maybe less durable things, it's not going to ruin them. Tundra's one thing, or like the crypto in Utah, like things that don't spring back like grass does, but still like within reason, and like knowing that it's not like we're bringing hundreds of people out into like destroy these places on purpose. Like there are very few people with very few footsteps.
Yeah. And this mainly goes to the Leave No Trace police.
Yeah.
That,
And I'm a stickler for the rules, usually.
yes, Todd's a huge stickler for rules.
But
And-
when they don't make sense, then maybe I have some more leeway.
Yeah. And I want to make it clear, I'm not saying break the rules, do whatever you want, right? If you know the rules, please follow them. Please follow the Leave No Trace principles, right? But for some other photographers, they might not know yet, and they're learning, and they're not going to steal business from you. And there's plenty to go around, and you don't have to be an ass about it. You don't have to leave a 1-star review. You don't have to publicly shame anybody. You don't even have to comment on it at all. Okay.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest part, right?
Yeah. And really, when you think about it, someone going off trail or picking a wildflower, God forbid, that is a much smaller impact than buying fast fashion brands through Amazon or something. It's like when we were all brainwashed into thinking that we could save the environment by no longer using plastic straws. But then the frickin' like ExxonMobil's dumping millions of gallons of oil in the ocean, right? Like, let's look at the big picture here, which is that to save our environments, bullying somebody online, like, you're not helping, and you're probably not perfect. And perfection is not the goal for any of this. We're supposed to enjoy the outdoors, right? We're not supposed to bully people. We're supposed to encourage more people to get out into the outdoors, right? And it's not your job. If it upsets you that millions of people visit Zion National Park each year, then take it up with the tourism board that advertises that park all over the fucking world, Like, there are systems at play here, and I just don't think that you, and I'm talking to the Leave No Trace police, that you bullying someone online or leaving a bad review or whatever is just not helping anything or anybody. If you feel the need to talk to somebody, do it kindly, do it considerately, and do it privately. That's where I really want to go. The other controversy about Leave No Trace, which I think is especially interesting given that we live in New Mexico, where we're surrounded by indigenous people who've been here for hundreds, if not thousands of years in the same places like where we live. They've been picking wildflowers. They've been going off trail. They've been hunting and gathering, right? And for thousands of years, they've been using the land the way they want to. The guy who put up our fence went into the wilderness and cut down a shit ton of trees for our Latia fence. That's the type of fence everyone uses around here. It was like approved by the HOA. So the implementation of the Leave No Trace principles in certain places has actually restricted access for indigenous people. So for some of the land, there's been some issues because it excludes indigenous people from using their land the way that they want to. And they gather plants, they hunt, they conduct ceremonies, they have all these traditional activities that they would use on the land, again, for centuries or millennia. And it didn't ruin anything, but because of these Leave No Trace principles, there have been places that have created controversy between the people who want to conserve the land and the indigenous people that want to use the land the way they want to use it. So it's just really interesting because you'd think like it would be black and white, but I don't see it that way anymore. And I was especially upset by this 1-star review that one of my members got. It brought me back to the time that I got publicly shamed. I've definitely had people comment on my Instagram posts in the past with mean things because of their own scarcity issues and gatekeeping issues. And I want everybody to be a good steward of the land. I want people to respect the land and follow the rules as much as possible. What I don't want is the policing. I want people to be kind and considerate, which is one of the frickin' principles. And when I was researching for some of this, this is just an article, like just the title. I didn't actually read it, but it says how not to be a bullying bitch in the outdoors. And there's definitely some people out there that could use that advice. So
we'll link to it in the show notes. You can read it for yourself.
Yeah. But yeah, and it's really just not your place to call people out or make them feel bad. I mean, we could definitely educate people. Some people who even think that they're following Leave No Trace might not be. But again, it's our job to be kind and considerate and educate privately and just think the best in people. You know, like I've found through the internet and the photography industry in general that photographers tend to be a catty group. They tend to be really catty, and there's a lot of things that they don't like that other photographers do. And I'm here to tell you that whatever other photographers are doing, it's not going to affect your business. And let's just assume the best in people instead of assuming the worst, and just be nice to each other. How about that? So that's my episode about Leave No Trace. And if you actually go to the Leave No Trace website and like read more about it, they really want people, like they're not encouraging people to be perfect. People have just taken it upon themselves to think that you have to be perfect and to call out other people. And it's just unnecessary. So anyway, thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Stoked with Megan McPhail. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. If you're looking for more inspiring content, check us out on Instagram at Stoked with Megan McPhail. And to learn more about my business coaching and how I can personally help you quit your 9-to-5, visit my website at meganmcphail.com. I hope this leaves you feeling stoked. See you next week.